Karen slammed her fist on the table, her face flushed with rage. I don't care what the bylaws say, you will take down that fence, or I'll make your life a living hell. Her neighbor, Sarah, sat in stunned silence, her hands trembling. She had spent weeks meticulously planning and constructing the fence to give her family more privacy in their backyard. But now, the neighborhood's self-appointed HOA president was demanding its removal. But the fence is within the guidelines, Sarah stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. It doesn't obstruct any common areas or block anyone's view. Karen leaned back in her chair, a cruel smile spreading across her face. That may be true, but I want better access to your property. I need to be able to walk through your yard whenever I please, and if you don't comply, I'll make sure that HOA fines you into bankruptcy. Sarah felt her stomach twist into knots. This was her dream home, the place she and her family had worked so hard to afford. The thought of losing it over a petty dispute with the neighborhood tyrant was almost more than she could bear. Please, Karen, there has to be a reasonable compromise we can. There is no compromise. Karen spat, slamming her fist on the table again. You will take down that fence, or else. The choice is yours. With that, she stood up and stormed out of the room, leaving Sarah alone with her thoughts, her heart pounding in her chest. Sarah sat in stunned silence, her mind racing. How could this be happening? She had followed all the rules, done everything by the book, and now the neighborhood's self-proclaimed HOA queen was threatening to ruin her family's lives. Tears welled in her eyes as she thought about the hours she had spent planning and building that fence. It was more than just a physical barrier, it was a symbol of the privacy and security she had worked so hard to create for her family. But as she replayed the confrontation in her mind, she knew that Karen would not back down. The woman was relentless, driven by a bizarre obsession with control and a complete disregard for the rules she was supposed to uphold. Sarah's fingers trembled as she reached for her phone, scrolling through her contacts. She had to talk to someone, to get some advice on how to handle this situation. Her husband, James, was at work, and she didn't want to worry him until she had a better understanding of what they were up against. Finally, she settled on calling her best friend, Emily. As the phone rang, Sarah took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. Emily, it's Sarah. I need your help. Karen just came by and... Sarah's voice caught in her throat as she tried to explain the situation. Emily listened intently, her concern growing with every word. Oh my God, Sarah, that's awful. What are you going to do? Sarah shook her head, feeling utterly overwhelmed. I don't know. She's threatening to have the HOA fine me if I don't take the fence down. I don't know what to do. Emily paused for a moment, then her voice took on a resolute tone. Okay, listen to me. You can't let Karen bully you like this. You need to stand your ground, and if she tries to fine you, we'll fight it. You're not alone in this, Sarah. I'm here for you, and we're going to figure this out. Sarah felt a glimmer of hope rise within her. Maybe, just maybe, she could stand up to the neighborhood tyrant after all. With Emily's words of encouragement ringing in her ears, Sarah felt a renewed sense of determination. She was not going to let Karen's bullying tactics intimidate her. This was her home, and she had every right to make decisions about her own property. Steeling herself, Sarah decided to take action. She grabbed her laptop and began furiously researching the HOA's bylaws, determined to find a loophole or clause that would support her case. As she scanned the legalese, her eyes narrowed with each passing minute. Aha! She exclaimed, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she composed a meticulously worded email to the HOA board. She detailed the encounter with Karen, citing the specific bylaws that permitted the installation of her fence, and firmly stated that she had no intention of removing it. Sarah paused, her finger hovering over the send button. She knew that this would likely escalate the conflict, but she couldn't back down. If she let Karen win this battle, the woman would only become emboldened, and Sarah feared for what other demands she might make in the future. With a deep breath, Sarah pressed send, her heart pounding in her chest. She leaned back in her chair, staring at the screen, waiting for the inevitable response. It didn't take long. Just a few minutes later, her phone began to buzz with an incoming call. Steeling herself, Sarah answered. "Hello, Sarah, this is the HOA board. We've received your email, and we'd like to schedule a meeting to discuss this matter further." Sarah felt a surge of relief, but also a twinge of trepidation. "Of course, when would you like to meet?" "Tomorrow evening, if that works for you. We'll need you and Karen to both be present." "All right, I'll be there," Sarah replied, her voice steady. As she ended the call, Sarah couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she would be able to reason with the board and put an end to Karen's demands. But deep down, she knew that this was only the beginning of a much larger battle. The next evening, Sarah took a deep breath as she stepped into the HOA's conference room. Karen was already there, her arms crossed and a smug expression on her face. The other board members eyed the two women with a mixture of curiosity and unease. "Thank you both for being here," the HOA president, Mr. Johnson, began. "We've reviewed the bylaws and your email, Sarah, and we understand that there seems to be a disagreement regarding the fence." Karen scoffed, rolling her eyes. "There's no disagreement. Sarah's fence is obstructing my access to her property, and it needs to come down." Sarah felt her hackles rise, but she forced herself to remain calm. "That's simply not true, Mr. Johnson. The fence is well within the guidelines set forth in the HOA bylaws. I've done my research, and there's no justification for removing it." Mr. Johnson held up a hand, silencing Karen before she could interrupt. "Be that as it may, Karen has raised some concerns about the fence that we feel need to be addressed." Sarah's heart sank, and she could feel the blood rushing to her face. "What kind of concerns?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Well, Karen has argued that the fence poses a safety risk, as it could impede emergency vehicle access to your property," Mr. Johnson explained, his tone apologetic. "That's absurd," Sarah exclaimed, her composure slipping. "The fence is set back from the property line and has a clearly marked gate. There's no way it would interfere with emergency access." Karen smirked, leaning forward in her chair. "That's not what the fire department told me when I spoke to them. They said the fence could cause issues in the event of an emergency." Sarah felt her stomach twist into knots. She had never even considered the possibility of the fence being a safety concern. But now, with the HOA board seemingly siding with Karen, she felt the weight of the world crashing down on her. I don't understand," she stammered, her voice trembling. "I thought I was doing the right thing by following the rules. I never meant to put anyone at risk." The room fell silent, the tension palpable as Sarah struggled to come to terms with this new development. As the silence in the room stretched on, Sarah felt her heart pounding in her chest. She had been so confident that the fence was within the HOA's guidelines, but now she was faced with the possibility that it could actually be a safety hazard. She glanced over at Karen, who was wearing a self-satisfied smirk. It was clear that the woman was reveling in her apparent victory, and Sarah felt a surge of anger coursing through her veins. "I want to speak to the fire department myself," she said, her voice steadier than she expected. "I need to understand their concerns and see if there's a way to address them without taking down the fence." Mr. Johnson nodded, his expression one of understanding. "That's a reasonable request, Sarah. We'll arrange for you to meet with the fire chief and discuss the matter further." Karen's smile faltered, and she opened her mouth to protest, but Mr. Johnson raised a hand to silence her. "In the meantime, we'll hold off on any decisions regarding the fence," he continued. "We want to make sure we have all the facts before we take any action." Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her. At least she would have the opportunity to plead her case and try to find a solution that worked for everyone. As the meeting adjourned, Karen stormed out of the room, muttering under her breath. Sarah lingered behind, nervously approaching Mr. Johnson. "Thank you for hearing me out," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I really appreciate you giving me a chance to address this issue." Mr. Johnson offered her a sympathetic smile. "I understand this must be a stressful situation, Sarah, but I want you to know that we take the safety of our community very seriously. If the fire department does have legitimate concerns, we'll work with you to find a resolution that works for everyone." Sarah nodded, feeling a renewed sense of hope. With the support of the HOA board and the opportunity to speak with the fire department, she was determined to find a way to keep her fence and maintain the privacy and security she had worked so hard to create. The next day, Sarah waited anxiously in her living room, her fingers drumming nervously on the armrest of her chair. She had received a call from the fire department, requesting a meeting to discuss the concerns about her fence. As the doorbell rang, Sarah took a deep breath and opened the door to greet the fire chief, a gruff-looking man with a stern expression. "Thank you for coming, Chief Wilkins," Sarah said, ushering him inside. "I really appreciate you taking the time to meet with me." The fire chief nodded, his gaze sweeping over the interior of the house. "Not a problem, Mrs. Henderson. I understand there's been some concern about the fence on your property." Sarah led him to the living room, gesturing for him to have a seat. "Yes, that's right. I was told that the fence could potentially impede emergency vehicle access, and I want to understand your concerns so we can find a solution." Chief Wilkins settled into the chair, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Well, the main issue is the width of the gate. It's just a bit too narrow to accommodate our largest fire trucks. In the event of an emergency, we need to be able to access your property quickly and without any obstacles." Sarah felt her heart sink. She had been so focused on maintaining her family's privacy that she hadn't even considered the practical implications of the fence's design. "I see," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Is there any way we could modify the gate to make it wider, or perhaps create a secondary access point?" The fire chief nodded, a hint of a smile appearing on his face. "That's exactly what I was hoping to discuss with you. I think we can come up with a solution that will work for everyone." Relief washed over Sarah as she listened to the chief outline a plan to widen the gate and add an emergency access point. It would require some additional work, but she was more than willing to make the necessary changes to ensure the safety of her community. As the chief left, Sarah felt a weight lifted from her shoulders. She had faced a daunting challenge, but with open communication and a willingness to compromise, she had found a way to keep her fence and maintain the safety of her neighborhood. With the fire department's concerns addressed, Sarah felt a renewed sense of optimism as she set out to make the necessary modifications to her fence. She had reached an agreement with Chief Wilkins to widen the gate and install a secondary access point, and she was determined to get the work done as quickly as possible. As she began planning the project, Sarah couldn't help but feel a twinge of annoyance towards Karen. The HOA president had clearly tried to use the safety issue as a way to force Sarah to remove the fence altogether, but Sarah was not about to be bullied. She decided to take a proactive approach, reaching out to the other members of the HOA board to update them on the progress. To her surprise, many of them were supportive of her efforts to find a compromise. "I'm glad you were able to work things out with the fire department," one of the board members, Mrs. Perez, said during a phone call. "We don't want to cause any unnecessary safety concerns, but we also want to respect the rights of homeowners to make reasonable improvements to their properties." Sarah felt a surge of relief and gratitude. It was clear that not everyone on the board was as unreasonable as Karen, and she was hopeful that she could find a way to work with them constructively. As the work on the fence progressed, Sarah made sure to keep the board updated on the changes. She even invited them to come and inspect the modifications once they were complete, wanting to demonstrate her commitment to addressing their concerns. When the final touches were put in place, Sarah stepped back and admired her handiwork. The fence was still standing, but it now featured a wider gate and a secondary access point that would allow emergency vehicles to easily enter the property if needed. Satisfied with the outcome, Sarah turned her attention to the upcoming HOA meeting, where she knew she would have to face Karen once again. But this time, she felt more prepared, armed with the knowledge that she had done everything in her power to find a reasonable solution. The tension in the HOA meeting was palpable as Sarah took her seat, her eyes darting from Karen's scowling face to the rest of the board members. She had made sure to arrive early, wanting to be the first to address the issue of the fence. As the meeting began, Sarah raised her hand, her voice steady and confident. "I'd like to provide an update on the modifications made to my fence, based on the concerns raised by the fire department," she said, her gaze meeting Karen's steely glare. She went on to describe the changes, highlighting the wider gate and the emergency access point. Several of the board members nodded approvingly, and Sarah couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph. When she finished, Karen stood up, her face flushed with anger. "This is unacceptable," she exclaimed, slamming her fist on the table. "The fence is still there, and it's still an eyesore. I demand that it be removed immediately." The other board members exchanged uneasy glances, and Mr. Johnson cleared his throat, his voice carrying a note of authority. "Karen, we've reviewed the modifications, and they appear to address the safety concerns that were raised. Unless there are any other reasonable objections, I believe we should move forward and consider this matter resolved." Karen opened her mouth to protest, but before she could speak, another board member, Mrs. Perez, spoke up. "I think Sarah has done a commendable job of finding a solution that works for everyone. We should be grateful that she was willing to work with us and the fire department to ensure the safety of our community." The room erupted in murmurs of agreement, and Karen's face fell as she realized that she was outnumbered. Defeated, she slumped back into her chair, glaring at Sarah with undisguised resentment. As the meeting adjourned, Sarah couldn't help but feel a sense of relief and accomplishment. She had stood up to the neighborhood tyrant and won, and she knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter in her life.